This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. One of the advantages of doing this podcast, this might sound obvious, people listen. Sometimes very interesting people listen. Interesting people that I've never met. One of those, and I won't say his last name because I did not ask for permission, but one of those interesting people, his name is Greg. Greg's got interesting friends. He turned me on to a particular video. A very bright guy, a friend of his, an associate of his, Peter Linneman. Awesome video on YouTube. It will be in the show notes. You got to watch it. And Peter Linneman just happens to be the principal of Linneman Associates. He is the CEO and founder of American Land Fund and of KL Realty. And he also previously served as the Albert Sussman Professor of Real Estate Finance and Public Policy at the Wharton School of Business. So Peter has just a touch background chops. Today, Peter and I take the whirlwind conversation around the economic shutdown that we have been living through, the COVID nightmare. I did not describe it as a nightmare on the episode with Peter, but to some degree, that's what it is from the economy standpoint and from a human life standpoint. But what I love about a conversation with a guy like Peter, you're going to end up looking at this particular time that we're living in through a different lens. He gives a different lens to look at it through. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, but it will be a different vantage. Without any further delay, let's jump right into my conversation with Peter Linneman. I had the good fortune, a buddy of yours turned me on to a presentation that I caught on YouTube. I will include that in the show notes for my listeners to go check out. Very detailed stuff from you. But before we get into some of the nitty gritty, heck, and this first question might end up getting the nitty gritty out of you, and your answer might be 45 minutes for all I know. But I caught a comment from Sam Zell, and he talked about the economy being permanently scarred. And he talked about human behavior changing permanently. When you hear those comments, and for all I know, you might know Sam, but when you hear those comments, how do you feel? What's your initial thought?
Well, Sam is a very dear friend for many, many years. I have a lot of respect for Sam. I think in one sense, Sam is right. You cannot go through an episode where most of the developed, quote, free economies of the world shut down for anywhere from 6 weeks to 3 months without it having an impact on your psyche as a citizen of those countries. I know that when China shut down, back when, a lot of us said, well, that's China. They're an authoritarian country. They're going to do whatever they want. Individual liberties, people right to decide for themselves. Gee, they have Uyghurs by the hundreds of thousands in education camps. But not in my country, that won't happen. And whether that was the Germans or the French or the whatever, US. And then you found out, think of that. Not only did they shut down, that they were willing to, they being the political class, whatever you want to call it, the decision-making group, was willing to take on 20, 25, 35% unemployment to do what, quote, they thought is right. I'm not suggesting anybody did anything here that they didn't think was right. That it's not a conspiracy. But the notion that your system is willing to take 25, 35% unemployment to achieve what they view as right is shocking. That will leave a permanent scar. And in that sense, I think Sam is 100% correct. of when will they do it again. I don't think it'll be an affirmative thought. I think it's just going to be buried deep within you that I went from the strongest economy in the history of the world in the United States. Not that it didn't have flaws, but it was the strongest, largest economy in the history of the world to 26% unemployment as we sit here today. Sort of basically a 7-time increase in unemployment in 9 weeks. That leaves a scar. That will leave a scar. I don't think the disease is the issue. We've faced diseases, polio, and we faced, just go through it, smallpox, et cetera, et cetera. And they don't seem serious because, quote, you weren't alive then. But go back and read contemporaneous discussions of smallpox and cholera, polio. We had a president who had been a victim of polio. So I think the disease will leave less of a scar than the, oh my God, this can happen to us, will leave a scar. It will dampen entrepreneurship because if, quote, they can take it away just like that because they are doing a better good, it will dampen
risk appetite.
Risk appetite. That's perfectly said. And I think also what it will affect is savings. Although it's very interesting as I talk to people about savings, it's an oddity. I know this sounds crazy. The people who save say, thank God I saved, it's tiding me over. And I'm not talking about billionaires here. I'm talking about real people, normal people. I come from normal people. The ones who didn't save, interestingly, are saying, thank God I didn't save because I would have just lost it anyway. And you go, that's an interesting kind of approach to life.
That's all new territory right there.
Yeah, and I think it will increase, at least for a while, saving. I don't think it dampens travel long term. I don't think it dampens entertainment long term. Think of 9/11. People were never going to travel again after 9/11. Well, if you looked at it in February of this year, you would have thought that was a nonsensical statement, but you would have noticed they traveled different. Scanners and this, and you took your shoes off and jackets off. Yes, we traveled, but we did it differently. I think that's what you'll see with entertainment, casinos, and concerts and ball games, but that's going to take several years to find out the right answer. I think we're living in a world, and I think Sam is right also in this sense. We're living in a world where decisions are being made saying the government loves your loved ones more than you do. The government cares more about your employees than you do. And the government cares more about your customers than you do. And in my experience, maybe I'm biased, in my experience, the government doesn't care as much about my loved ones as I do. The government doesn't care as much about my employees as I do. And the government doesn't care as much about my customers as I do. And in fact, the dynamism of almost every economy is we care more about our loved ones than the regulators. We care more about and in that regard, what sort of happens is that once you are relying on the government to care more about your lives than you do, it's a dampening factor. And I think Sam's right in that sense. We're in an era where instead of saying the regulations are there to tamp down a few aberrants, we're tamping down everybody. And that will affect psyches. I think Sam is dead right. Economically, I don't know if it's 5 years or 3 years or 12 years. It will be back. We did through the wars. We did through the Great Depression. We did through other diseases. We did through 9/11. It will come back, and it'll look the same but a little different when it comes back. But the psyche part, I think, is dead on. I know that's a long answer, but I think it's a kind of socially important answer.
Absolutely. But let's talk about recovery and rebound. Right now, they're getting ready to announce unemployment numbers that are off the hook. I think I jotted down before this conversation 33.5 million jobs lost since this started. The second part of this, I'll let you can clarify and run with it, but the second part I wanted to add to it is all these jobs lost. But people are looking at the stock market and saying, gosh, my retirement account looks good.
Yeah. So take that in a couple parts. First of all, you're right. It is about 33.5 million, quote, reported have lost their jobs. But that forgets the fact that we started with 5 million unemployed. That makes it 38.5 unemployed from that point of view. Plus, the number that came out yesterday was for the week that ended the Wednesday earlier. We're sitting here 9 days later. You have another, 4 million just for a fast number? That gets you to 42, 43 million unemployed as we sit here today. Maybe a million were hired during that time. Yeah, Amazon hired some people, some groceries hired some people. That says unemployed as we sit here today, probably 40 to 41 million. That's a 26% unemployment rate. That's higher than during the Great Depression. That's, quote, the fact of it. And that's horrible. That's horrible. And yes, they're getting unemployment, while during the Great Depression, they did not receive unemployment benefits by and large. So it's a different scenario. As to the stock market, first of all, I've never understood the stock market. I understand what the stock market is, quote, trying to do. You can look at the stock market as, look, it's supposed to be the perpetuity value of future cash streams, and the perpetuity is a long time, discounted by the appropriate risk factor. That's a great theory. What the hell does that mean in reality? The perpetuity cash flows haven't changed much by this. The next 2 or 3 years cash flows changed, but the perpetuity stream is not much different. If I were to ask you what is going to be the profit of a company 22 years from now, your guess today is not much different than your guess would have been January 1st. It is what it is. But for the next 2 or 3 years, that means the discount, quote, rate, the risk factor matters a lot, because at a high discount rate, the future doesn't matter. It's all about the present. I think what happened is we went from a moment of greed, extreme greed, for the period, from summer last year till early March. The extreme greed, that is a low discount rate that said the future matters a lot, the present matters little. Then at the same time, cash streams in the near term drop because of the shutdown. Not interesting because of COVID, because of the shutdown. At the same time, the near-term cash streams dropped a lot. Greed swung to fear in the discount rate and said, I don't care about the future, I only care about now. That's the huge drop you saw instantly in the stock market. Instantly. Then I think what's happened is people are saying, if the market has a brain at all, it has an organism, but not so much a brain. It's saying, well, wait, it's not as awful as I thought it was. We're not going to see 7 million dead in the US. We're not going to see, what I'm going to see is a shutdown that screwed things up. The world isn't coming to an end. And you saw not greed coming back, but absolute fear receding. Discount rate went down a little. That brought values back up a bit. If you look at it, the values are not so different than about 3 years ago. So one way to look at it is the world is looking from a perpetuity value about the same as it did 3 years ago. That doesn't sound so stupid to me. I don't know if it's perfect and it'll be a bumpy ride up and down, but that's my sense of the stock market. It's a bit intellectual, but it's about fear and greed on the discount rate. It's about perpetuity values, and the near term matters a lot if the discount rate is very high.
Let me shift you into a topic that I don't think you'll say the same thing as you said about stocks. Let me shift you to real estate, both commercial and residential. Why don't you lay out a scenario, as I mentioned Sam Zell at the top. Obviously, this is right in your wheelhouse. But for the layperson and the experienced pro out there, why don't you give your perspective on how we will see both commercial and residential real estate unfolding in the next handful of years?
Single family starts are going to come to a stop over the next few months. they're going to plunge because people don't buy homes if there's a 25% unemployment rate. You need confidence and income and down payment ability to buy homes. You don't have confidence, income, and down payment ability when you have a 25% unemployment rate. So the starts are going to plunge. By the way, in the near term, demand is going to plunge because if you don't have income and so forth. As a result, on home prices, it's a matter of does the supply dry up faster than the demand in terms of home values. I expect home values to fall on very few transactions over the next 6 months. That is to say, I don't have to sell my home. I'm living here. I'm perfectly happy. If they're going to make me sell at a deep discount, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to keep living here. So I think you don't get many transactions over, let's say, the quote, rest of the year. And then it starts normalizing depending on how the unemployment goes and how the economy goes. On the rental side, multifamily rental and single family, the fact that you don't have income, you don't have confidence, et cetera, will keep people from buying, and that will bolster the demand for rental, and that would tend to push up rents. Also, at the same time, construction of multifamily is going to dry up because construction loans are going to dry up, already have, and the capital that was funding construction on the equity side is going to look to distress. Distress is easier than getting permits. All that would tend to suggest that rents go up. There's one thing that suggests rents go down, and that is with a 25% unemployment rate, a lot of people move back home. They just move back home. I use as my example of that all the graduating high school seniors and all the college seniors who normally the mass of them would get a job and rent an apartment. Well, they aren't going to get a job and they don't qualify for unemployment. So where do you think they're going to live? They're not going to move into the apartments over the next 3 months. They're going to stay home. I actually think rents and occupancy weaken over this year as the stay at home driven by unemployment outweighs the reduction in supply in the near term and the not buying home. When you go to the commercial side, we've already seen Wall Street say real estate's worth 15 to 35% less. The private market, there are just no transactions because the bid ask is too big. The owners want pre-shutdown values and the buyers want 25% IRRs. That's a much lower price. And the only people who are going to sell are those that have to sell. What's a have to sell? Your father, mother died. They left some real estate to you. You want the cash. You're going to sell. But the more institutional kind of stuff, you're just not going to see many transactions in the private market. Sometimes in downturns or historically in downturns, you get transactions driven after a few months by foreclosures. The lender says, nope, if you're not going to pay, I'm going to take the property and we're going to sell it, and you sell it no matter what. That's not going to happen except maybe with CMBS loans, because the banks, for the only time in history, literally the only time in history, have massive excess reserve capacity. Therefore, they can forbear with their capacity, and because they have that capacity that was given to them by the Fed, they're being told forbear. You're going to see massive forbearance over the coming months with relatively few transactions. Then what happens on the other side, again, depends on where's the economy a year or so from now.
Let me keep it at something that you brought up in your presentation that caught my eye. I actually had a guest on recently talking about this topic. This is the value of a human life. Because when you scuttle the economy like we have done, and the trillions that have been forsaken, lost in dollars, then you look at the lives lost. I mean, there is a calculus going on there by decision makers that the average person's probably not pondering.
I find it actually very offensive when people say, oh, all you care about is dollars, you don't care about lives. They don't know me. I care enormously about lives. And I understand that resources used for one thing can't be used for another. There's a lot of ways you can save lives. You can save it by reducing mental illness. You can save it by alcohol abuse being reduced. You can save it by cancer screenings that have not occurred for the last 2 months, colonoscopies that did not occur for the last 2 months, etc. There's a whole lot. Governor Cuomo made the comment that life is priceless and we will refuse to put a value on the life. I think that's almost exactly a quote. I'd like that governor and others who say that to explain to me why one of our soldiers killed in action, serving their country at their country's request that put them in harm's way, basically their survivors get $200,000. They get it in a stream of payments, but they basically get $200,000. That is to say, our country has said that if you lose your life in harm's way serving us, it's worth about $200,000. And the same government officials are saying life is priceless. Now, if you do the math, and it's all just math, what I'm now about to say. If you do the math, by any reasonable calculation, we're saying a life seemingly saved is worth about $100 million, a COVID life saved. By the way, courts generally put a value of life between 1.5 and 3.5 million. Some government agencies, as they do cost-benefit analysis, go from about 2 million to 9 million, depending on the nature of the persons. Are they young? By the way, we know that about 55% of all the COVID deaths occur to people in nursing homes, not senior living, nursing homes. And the typical life expectancy of somebody in a nursing home is about 6 to 18 months. We're saying that that life is worth about 100 million, given the rough number of deaths. And by the way, assume there are twice as many deaths that occur, then it's 50 million. The calculus just doesn't pass muster. If lives are worth that, the amount of money we should be putting in cancer research and heart disease, which is the number one killer. Heart disease is the number one killer in the United States. If a life is worth 100 million, do you understand how much should be put into heart disease research? It is simply a matter of lives. It is what can we use our resources for?
I guess from your situation, you bringing it up, when people are very emotional, they don't want to hear the hard analysis. They don't want to hear the facts. They want to stay in that emotional moment because the emotional moment gives people power.
No doubt. My mother passed away at age 95 in November in a nursing facility where she had actually lived for about 3 years, and she couldn't stand and she couldn't walk and she basically couldn't move and her mind was gone. And she was a poster child for everything that you don't want to have when you get to that age. It just was factual. When my mother passed, they had to put a cause of death in November, and I think they put congestive heart failure. But come on, there were 92 things that were killing her. Her loved ones were relieved and happy, but also, to your point, conflicted and sad. That is got to be true of everybody who has a loved one. No one wants their loved one to, we're selfish. We don't want our loved ones to leave us. We want them with us. On the other hand, a lot of the ones that are dying, if you're honest, are in enormous pain and suffering, unrelated to COVID. I'm not saying all. You have to know some of them find it a relief. And my mother would have probably died of COVID because I think they had, when I looked a couple of weeks ago, they've had like 9, 10 deaths in that particular facility from COVID. So in all likelihood, she'd have caught it, and that would have been what they put on her death certificate. But we had been waiting for months for her to die to know what was going to be on her death certificate and relieve her from her general misery.
Let me take it to the other end of the spectrum, and you spoke about this in your presentation. Young people today, and I've tried to do as much reading as I can on this disease, on COVID, young people seem to be escaping harm from this disease as long as they are not in some risk group. But they're not really escaping harm in terms of what's going to happen to them in terms of their lives, because if they're graduating, as you make the point, high school, college, the military, or whatnot, entering life, so to speak, now, they're looking at a brutal decade, aren't they?
Oh, and they're not getting educated. Let's face it, the last 3 months or 2 months, I guess, 2 months, has been the 2 months of, jokingly, you didn't think our education system could go lower? I was wrong. They could. I didn't think our universities could generally do a worse job of educating students than they were previously doing. They could. It's not because they haven't tried. It's just, so the loss of education, the loss of job opportunities, the loss of direction and clarity, the emotional turmoil, huge, huge. As it turns out, now we didn't know this. China may have known it. A couple of Taiwan had some indication, Singapore had some indication. But by the end of February, we didn't understand that this basically didn't care about young and it didn't care about healthy. By the way, the reason that it appears to be killing the aged is that they just have a lot of comorbidity conditions. They just have a lot of those conditions. And with hindsight, it's pretty clear that hindsight's wonderful. We should have kept schools going and said that if you're one of the teachers and you have a comorbidity factor, don't come. We're going to replace you with young, healthy temp. By the way, the government's going to pay your unemployment during that time to keep you whole. If you're a principal, same way. If you're a comorbidity situation, we'd have kept the schools going. We'd have kept the universities going the exact same way. We'd have said to the students and parents, by the way, if your child does have cancer, if it does have heart disease, they should not be coming. Maybe they take a gap year. Maybe we do it for them, not the whole class, virtual. There's almost no evidence, as I read it, that these young people have given it to their grandparents, that it does not seem to be the transmission mechanism. It's like everybody's worried about getting it at the beach. There's almost no evidence that anybody gets this outside. It's all inside transmission. You go back to the senior living being the poster child in that regard. We have imposed a huge cost on young people and healthy people. High immunity system, when I say healthy, high immunity, low comorbidity factors. We've imposed an enormous cost on them to benefit a very identifiable slice of society. And in fact, I was saying to a co-author, Mike Roizen at Clinic, and I and Albert Ratner are writing a book that comes out in April about life, living longer, better, et cetera, the medicine of it, the economics of it. And we were talking about, in the absence of a vaccine, if we want to greatly ameliorate the impact of this virus, now and into the future, it's very simple what we do. We say, if you're obese, go on a mandatory diet. Go on a mandatory exercise program where you have to walk an hour a day, or stationary bike, or lift. You have to do something, because we know that diet, exercise, stress management, not smoking, we know that those massively raise immunity at a DNA level. I mean, this is real science. And we know that people who are high immunity people and low comorbidity are not at risk. If our entire population, even though some of them are aged, we're not obese, and we're not, the death rate of this would be about a quarter of what it has been. If over the next 6 months, the people at risk said, okay, starting today, more vegetables, more fruit. I'm going to walk an hour a day briskly. I'm going to climb some stairs. I'm going to, et cetera, et cetera. 6 months from now, we would not have vaccinated, not in a technical way, but we would have immunized in a strange way, or highly immunized a huge portion of our population. And we can do it ourselves. We don't have to shut down the economy to do it.
Let me bring up a action that one of the world's greatest investors took recently. He talked about it at his shareholder meeting. Warren Buffett talked about dumping all of his U.S. airlines. Now, as you made the point, like, look, we all know at some stage, somehow or another, air travel will come back. I mean, we all want that. But it's an interesting nugget to see someone like Buffett so publicly take down airlines. And look, I think we can all probably agree that airlines were a great way that this thing spread from Wuhan. I mean, everyone got on those planes and went around the world. It wasn't just cruise ships, so to speak. So what do you make of if we try to project forward a little bit, getting us back to air travel, beyond just making the connection to 9/11 and saying, well, things are going to change. I mean, I'm far away from you right now. I'm about 8,000 miles away. And it really feels like air travel is going to be down for a while. Back to my point with Buffett, is Buffett seems to be saying that too.
Yeah, I don't know Mr. Buffett. 2 observations. One is that historically, airlines have lost a lot of money. These periods where they make money, but somebody did this calculation a few years ago that over the entire existence of airlines, from when they began back in, I guess, the 20s, that they've lost a staggering amount of money. Maybe it was Buffett that pointed that out. His entry into airline investing was relatively new, and if you go back, it made a big splash when he said he was investing and surprised a lot of people. I would interpret his getting out of it as there's just no transparency on when and how it occurs. I'm in the low-risk investing business, not the no transparency investing business. It doesn't mean that he doesn't think that they'll someday make money. It's just no transparency, and he's an investor in transparency. So that's the first thing. Second is, I'm a huge traveler. I mean, I've had trips canceled like you can't imagine to all over the world so far this year. How's it get back? Certainly masks, certainly better air filtration systems, certainly better sanitation. My wife and I have been wiping down our seats and surrounding area for about 20 years. We're those people. We're not germaphobes, but come on. We're those people that when we come into the plane have our little wipes, and do, always have. Sometimes what you wiped was kind of gritty. That's obviously going to change. Who knows? Maybe they come up not only with air filtration, but air mist that spritzes. I don't know. In the same way, I didn't know how we were going to protect from terrorists before 9/11, but they found ways. They probably overdid it. I have a feeling over the next 3 years is going to be a process of figuring it out. Remember when they first opened up the airlines after 9/11, they randomly picked passengers to secondary screen, and they did about 40% of the passengers. Well, that didn't last very long. Yes, you can still get randomly picked, but how often does that occur? Not very often. That's the kind of process I envision. Overkill. A plane that carried 300 is going to carry 50, and then it's going to be 70, and then it's going to be 110, and then it's going to be 200. By then, they'll have figured out how to deal with it. We're pretty creative. I don't know how they get there, but I know that they get there. By the way, maybe the plane that carried 300 will never carry more than 260. That's fine. I mean, but it's going to carry a lot of people.
I like about what you're saying, though, is overall, you're just implying the attitude reach down, tie the bootstraps tight. Everyone, let's get creative. Let's solve it. Let's figure it out. And as you said at the very beginning of this conversation, don't just think that the bureaucrats in the Washington, D.C. area at desk jobs somehow or another know more about the economy than all the private sector folks out there with money on the line.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's the one thing, things are starting to open up around the world. The one thing that's most bothersome and the thing that will slow the opening up, as the same thing that will slow solving the airplane problem and others, the hotel problems, is this belief that I love you or loved ones more than you do. I care more about your employees than you do. And I care more about your customers. And it's just not true. So I have basically an office with about 5 people in it. Everybody has a private office. That's a very different kind of solution than a company that has an open floor plan, that has people sitting shoulder to shoulder. They've got a very different solution they've got to come up with than I do. Some people have an office where 100% of the people drive to work and sit in private offices. Others have where everybody takes the subway to work and sits shoulder to shoulder. Those are very different solutions. Governments are not good at coming up with different solutions. They're good at coming up with one size fits all. It's too hard for a government to come up with very nuanced solutions. And you said it perfectly, which is the solution to this, all of this on the economic side, is presume that I love my loved ones more than you do. Presume. So if you see me hugging my mother, if you see me hugging an old woman at the park, do not assume we're not social distancing, blah, 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 assuming I know their background and I know their health situation and I care about them more than the governor. We'll get on quite well, I think, if we do that.
I want to ask you kind of one open-ended question. Is there something that you would like to say, just outside of where I've been probing your mind? Is there something near and dear to you that you've been sharing with colleagues or friends or family, something that I have not touched on today that's really important to you in this whole COVID time?
2 things. One is we overcome. And I don't mean that in some Pollyanna sense. We overcome. As I say, we've overcome wars. We've overcome bad presidents. We've overcome good presidents. We've overcome bad regulations, good regulations. Through our history, we've overcome diseases and so forth and so on. This is just one more. And in fact, if you sort of look at it, you kind of go, what's the fuss? I have a feeling historians are going to look back at this shutdown, not just in the United States, the world, and they're going to say, what the hell was that all about? They shut down for that. They didn't shut down for this. They didn't shut down for this. What were they thinking? I think it's going to go down analogous to the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, triggering World War I, and historians are still writing books about how did that happen? A secondary royalty from the Austria-Hungary Empire gets assassinated by an anarchist. And the next thing you know, World War I is underway with all the upheaval that how did that happen? And I'll give you the other one in a more contemporaneous, which was President Kennedy sends some military advisors to Vietnam. And the next thing you know, we have 100,000 soldiers there fighting frontline war. How did that happen? And historians still write about how did that happen? I think this episode will be, it was a disease, it was a challenge, but how the hell did they shut down the whole economy? How did that happen? How did you get to 26% unemployment in 8-9 weeks? And why? Why did they do that? We will overcome. We will just overcome. And the only question is how long. And it historically is a lot shorter than you thought. It's just a historically much shorter, not short, but much shorter. That's one thing I'd say. And the other thing I'd say, I'm not a politician. I'm not political. I don't mean this for or against either party. I don't mean this for or against any government in power anywhere, remind yourselves and remind your elected officials, you care more about your loved ones than they do. You care more about your employees than they do, and you care more about your customers than they do. If they do not understand that, they don't respect you. Politicians who don't respect you are politicians you shouldn't vote for. This has no face on it. This is not Democrat, Republican, pro-Macron. This is a broad philosophical statement. And that would be a message I'd give to people and hope they'd think about. I give one last message we haven't talked about, which is almost everybody who listens to this is better off than somebody who's really bad off. And we support about 140 children in Kenya, orphans and children of very difficult circumstances. And if you think our circumstances are difficult here, their circumstances are much more difficult. And if everybody here, hearing this, pause for a moment and says, however bad it is for me, it's even a lot worse for somebody, find an agency that helps that somebody and volunteer. Find somebody that is worse off than you and send them a condolence or I'm thinking of you or cheering up note if you don't have money. And if you do have money, send $12. I'm not saying send 12 billion. Send something in the recognition that there are people who are much worse off than you, struggling even more. I spend about an hour a day communicating with my kids in Kenya. What do? Just kind of cheering them. Many of them don't have electricity at this point. It's just cheer somebody who needs it.
Peter, great insights. Thank you for a very wide view. As I let you run, is there a website you would like to direct people to for people can go check your work out?
Sure. You can reach out to my brother, Doug, at D. Linneman, Linneman, at LinnemanAssociates.com. D. Linneman at LinnemanAssociates.com. The website that you can go to is LinnemanAssociates.com. We post various musings I have, recordings I've had, interviews I've given. Hopefully, Mike, you'll be nice enough to give us a link and we'll post that.
100%.
Thank you very much.
Hey, take care. I know you got to run.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.